You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Deuteronomy 6:8 ESV. Repairing the Romans road, number 5. Why does Paul mention being ashamed of the gospel? He says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel." Now, that's great, but Paul, why do you even bring that up as a possibility? Why ashamed? Paul writes in other letters of being ashamed of his imprisonment and other sufferings, but not of the gospel. But he introduces his argument in Romans with the idea of the possibility of being ashamed of the gospel. So why even bring it up? Perhaps the gospel leads to accusations in Romans, and Romans has several. Our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, so God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us, isn't he? Or do evil that good may come. Don't we teach that? Some slanderously say we do. And he asks, do we remain in sin that grace may abound? Now, who would think of that? God should not find fault with us because we can't, that should be a T in there, we can't resist his will. All right, I'm going to deal with the top two, excuse me. I'm especially going to deal with Romans 3 because we can deal with other things as they come up, and also I think you'll see how the answer applies to the other two issues. All right, the other two passages. All right, Romans 3, 1 and 2, ESV. Then what advantage has the Jew, or what is the value of circumcision? Much in every way. To begin with, the Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. Now, and then it goes on to say, what if some were unfaithful? Does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? Now, I want you to see the words here are related. Entrusted is the same root word as unfaithful, faithlessness, faithfulness. So God entrusts the Jews with something, and they're unfaithful with it. Let's see, I can show you in the Greek. I don't know if you can see all the similarities. Epistuthe, epistason, epistia, and piston. It's hard to do this in English. Here's what I would suggest. The Jews were entrusted with the oracles of God. What if some were untrustworthy? Does their untrustworthiness nullify the trustworthiness of God? What does all this mean? I think we need to look at circumcision and at the time when the Jews were indeed entrusted with the oracles of God, and this will make a lot more sense. So let's look at circumcision first. First established for Abraham and his descendants in Genesis 17, though of course the covenant of circumcision involves content that we can get from previous statements God has made. The promise includes, though, in that passage, along with his name change from Abram to Abraham, it includes the promise, I have made you the father of a multitude of nations, which is more than just Israel. And in fact, we see a picture of that in Genesis itself. A few generations later, Joseph says to his father Jacob, God has made me a father to Pharaoh. And that means a teacher, someone Pharaoh depends upon, someone who Pharaoh recognizes as being guidance and having the Spirit of God. That will, I'd love to do a whole commentary on that, but that will have to wait to another video series. So circumcision represents God's calling on Abraham, and that goes back to 12, 1 through 3. Let's look at that. There's the promise to Abraham, the calling. And look there, it says, I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. But that's not the end of the story. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So you will be a blessing. All the families of the earth will be blessed. So let's set this up. We can say that God created humanity and the nations. Now there's several things I'm combining here because I just don't have time. God has created humanity. Humanity has rebelled and there's sin. God has also, as a result of the outworking of that sin, scattered the humanity into many nations, which is why he's calling Abraham to be one nation. Remember, he confused their languages to separate them. So you've got sin and confusion working against humanity, but God's created them, and God has called, by covenant of circumcision, has called Abraham to, in some way, be a blessing to the nations. Now, of course, Abraham himself has things working against him. He's tempted to faithlessness. Now, he doesn't succumb that often or that much, actually very little, but and not enough to derail this plan, of course. His sons, there's a different story, and that's why they had to go into Egypt, and some things that follow from that, which we won't get into. But let's talk about the second part of this. They were entrusted with the oracles of God. They had the covenant of circumcision, and they were entrusted with these oracles. Now, Abraham's descendants became the nation of Israel, as hopefully you know, and God rescues Israel from slavery in Egypt a little bit later, in, after Genesis and Exodus. And he does this to fulfill his promise to Abraham by giving them the land of Canaan, which he had promised to them. And in the wilderness at Mount Sinai, God entrusts Israel with the law. All right. Moses later preached a whole sermon on this law, which is called Deuteronomy, which means second law, implying that it's being reviewed again from Exodus when it was given. And he says this, "See, I have taught you the statutes and rules as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples." Now that's plural, that means other nations, Gentiles, who when they hear all these statutes will say, "Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people." So part of this whole blessing, Abraham's going to be a blessing to all the families of the earth. And we saw that begin with Joseph, who rescued Egypt from famine by what God gave him and the fact that Pharaoh trusted him. That's going to happen. Somehow the nations are going to see in Israel. Israel's going to be a light to the nations. It's going to spread light and replace darkness. So God sent Abraham, or Israel, Abraham's seed, to the nations. And then God entrusted the oracles of God, or the law, to Israel for this purpose. Pretty simple. So the obvious expectation is that Israel would be faithful with the oracles of God, the law, and thereby be used by God to fulfill his promise, God's promise, to bring salvation to bring the salvation of the Gentiles. I should have said to the Gentiles there, but anyway. And God would prove himself thus faithful and righteous through the faithfulness and righteousness of Israel. We see some confirmation of this expectation in Romans 2. Paul says to the Jews, "And if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor to the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth." So he's saying to the Jews that they think that they're this to the Gentiles. They've been scattered out throughout the whole Gentile world. We see that in the book of Acts, and they're supposed to be spreading light. He says instead they're spreading darkness. I'm not going to quote all of it, but there it is, the summation. "The name of God is blasphemed among the nations because of you." Gentiles means nations. So, this is the scandal of the gospel story, as Paul talks about it in the book of Romans, in his letter to the Romans. God brought about the salvation of the world through the unfaithfulness of Israel. God demonstrated his faithfulness and righteousness through Israel's unfaithfulness and unrighteousness. And thus, Romans 3:3-8. "But what if some were faithful? Does their faithlessness nullify? What if some were unfaithful? Does their faithlessness nullify the faithfulness of God? No means. Let God be true, though everyone were a liar, as it is written, that you may be justified in your words and prevail when you are judged. But if our unrighteousness serves to show the righteousness of God, what shall we say? That God is unrighteous to inflict wrath on us? I speak in a human way. By no means, for then how could God judge the world? But if through my lie God's truth abounds to his glory, why am I still being condemned as a sinner? And why not do evil that good may come, as some people slanderously charge us with saying? Their condemnation is just." Now, I think this shows us why Paul begins by insisting he's not ashamed of all this. Alright? God has basically used Israel's sin, which I think in a previous video we showed was in fact the crucifixion of Jesus. He used that, and he used the culminating judgment day that they brought about to deal with sin, to condemn sin in the flesh. So you'll need to look at the past videos to see how all this works out. And later on, I'm sure we'll do more with Romans 6 and Romans 9. Well, thanks for your attention. I hope you have a great day till we meet again through the YouTube videos.